PCOS. I've had quite a few clients lately, or people that have come to me wanting to work on their PCOS, or they've had PCOS and they've had it for a long period of time. And there's a few big things that need to be addressed when someone has PCOS. And what I want to explain to you today is some of the big drivers of that, the underlying causes of that, and looking at it from a very, the way I look at it and the way I work is looking at things from a very holistic point of view, so that you're addressing it from the cause, the real root cause, not just slapping a Band-Aid over it. And when I say slapping a Band-Aid over it, it often comes in the form of taking the oral contraceptive pill or being put on the Mirena as a way to deal with those symptoms, but it doesn't actually address the underlying cause. And so when we're dealing with PCOS, there's a couple of things you need to know. First of all, PCOS, it's a group of symptoms, and those group of symptoms, it's not actually a condition per se, it's polycystic ovarian syndrome. And whenever they say syndrome, it just means a group of symptoms, and this is the presentation of what's happening. And often it also means that they don't really know, they being mainstream medical don't really know what to do with it. And usually when people come to me, they're at the point where they've been put on the pill and the pill isn't working for them, like it makes them feel crazy, they don't like how they feel on it, or they also realize that that's not the solution and they want to actually do something about it. And often women have had this issue for a long time, they've put up with it, they've put up with the pain, and there's a lot of different things that are going on in this collective of issues. And I just want to talk about some of the drivers. So I've put a few things on my little whiteboard here. I guess the diagnosis or the symptoms of PCOS is not just having cysts on your ovaries, although that is an important aspect of it. There's also other symptoms like excess hair, weight gain, elevated testosterone, which comes from the ovaries, your hormones. When you do your blood work, there's certain things that show up, including elevated testosterone, elevated luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, meaning that you make more follicles get more produced in a higher rate around ovulation. Sometimes people don't even ovulate when they've got PCOS. Higher levels of prolactin. There's also obesity. So there's a lot of different elements going on for it to be that diagnosis. But the three big drivers of PCOS which need to be addressed is, there's actually four, but the three big ones is insulin resistance, androgen excess, meaning excess male hormones. So we have a group of hormones which are called androgen hormones. It's in the testosterone family, and there's too much of that. Inflammation. And I would also say for most part, there's also estrogen dominance happening with a lot of women, and there's this relationship happening between the two. So I just want to explain to you these three so you can get your head around, if you are suffering with PCOS and you can get your head around these things and you're like, okay, this is what we've got to work on. Now, when you look up the typical symptoms of PCOS, a lot of the time it will be obesity. You can get the excess hair growth. It could be on your nipples or on your tummy or on your arms, on your face, particularly on the face and the jawline. Acne, particularly cystic acne, hormonal acne around the chin, around the jawline. Weight gain, obesity is also a risk factor, but it doesn't mean you could have PCOS and not have that. And often what I've also experienced people being told, clients of mine have said, oh, you need to lose weight and the PCOS will go away. Yeah, that is a big element, but they're not explaining why that is the case. And so this is what I want to explain. So when we're talking about insulin resistance is a process that happens before diabetes, essentially, right? It starts with insulin resistance and becomes this condition known as metabolic syndrome, where you're not utilizing the energy as well as you should, and you're not utilizing the fuel as well as you should. You're making too more insulin than what you should because your cells are deaf to the insulin that is being produced by your pancreas. Now, what is insulin? Insulin is a hormone. Hormones are chemical messengers in the body. And so when we're talking about insulin resistance, here I've done a little diagram of every cell in our body needs energy, and we have these little mitochondria, which are the little energy factories in the cell, and we need to get essentially glucose into there for it to be converted into energy store. Energy is the currency of health. And so we want to go not just energy to be able to move and do things. Energy is also, I digress a little bit here, but energy is also how we feel, how people feel about ourselves. But energy, to me, my definition, is the real currency of health. And so when we're talking about energy and creating energy from a biochemical perspective, what has to happen is we've got to get the fuel into the cell, and the cell has to then, the mitochondria has to do their job to make the energy. So the fuel is there to burn. What happens with insulin resistance is we've got these little receptors on our cell. And the idea is that the insulin, when we eat some food, our blood sugar levels will raise. Insulin will then get triggered. And it is to tell the cell to uptake glucose to go into the cell. But this needs to bind to the receptor. I'm totally paraphrasing here, but I'm simplifying it for you, right? But this needs to bind to the receptor, and then it's like the key that goes into the door to turn the door handle to get into the house. Now, imagine there is a party happening in an apartment. This massive party that's going off, and or someone's got the TV on, either way. Someone has the TV on, they've got it really loud, and so to get into the house, say you don't have the key, you've got to let someone open the door and let you in to get into the house because you haven't got the key. To get in, you've got to knock on the door. Now, if the person has got the TV on up, or they've got the music up, or there's a party going on in the house, they can't hear the person knocking at the door to be let into the party. So that is the same as insulin resistance. The volume is turned up and it cannot hear. So which basically means that these receptors are not as sensitive to insulin, and more insulin needs to be made for energy to get into the cell. Now, what does that mean in realistic terms, like actual functional terms, is that we can't get our energy into our cells. We can't get the energy we need, even though it's there. Our body then goes, shit, we've got to do something about this because there's all this sugar in the blood, and we'll store it as fat and we'll use it later. That's what happens. And so this is what happens, the phase before metabolic syndrome, and which is a series of symptoms as well, including insulin resistance before type 2 diabetes. And so this is where the path is going. And so with insulin resistance, when there is excess insulin and excess blood sugar and excess insulin in the body, there'll then be a knock-on effect. And one of those knock-on effects is we actually will make more insulin, can cause more testosterone to be made in the body, right? It can it allows more testosterone to be made in the top layers of our skin, from our ovaries. There's a real knock-on effect with that. And then, and this is what androgen excess is. So whenever you're talking about androgen excess, we're talking about insulin resistance. because how do we address this? We need to address this, right? And so that comes down to what you're eating, how you're moving, and what you're thinking, because stress has a direct impact. Cortisol, which is also a hormone, which gets made in the body. Adrenal glands will produce excess cortisol. This also causes our insulin to rise because it's that hormone that is there to protect us so we can go into quick action and run from the tiger or the bear. Now, in modern day world, we don't have tigers or bears, but we have financial stress. We have emails pinging at us all the time, messages where we've got high pressure jobs. There's a lot of different stresses, and our body, depending on the state of our nervous system, will react the same way as though our life is in threat, even though our life is not in threat. And so the way that we manage stress, I'm going to write that over here, plays a massive role in this and in this, because when we have more cortisol, we may have more insulin, and it's this knock-on effect, and it's there to keep us safe and to keep us alive. But the problem is that we are still back in thousands of years ago, our brain, but we are here and our body hasn't caught up with the adaptation of that, because we've moved from in a world that's changed so fast that there's so many different aspects that can impact the way our hormones function now, because we're still in that survival primal brain. Our brain still works from a primal perspective, right? Keep us alive. And so insulin resistance, androgen excess, the other thing that can really impact it is estrogen dominance, which is also a condition, and this also plays a role with PCOS. Basically, all these things in our environment that are excess estrogens or mimic estrogens, and then our body isn't able to clear it, and then it will act in certain ways that will cause more, it will respond as a result. And because we're not clearing it out, the body will respond like it's got extra estrogen in there. And so there's this direct correlation between these three with the gut, the way the gut is working, the way the liver is working, because these two work hand in hand. And this is the foods we eat and the way we think and move. And then the stress is connected to those two. And so when we're looking at any type of androgen excess, estrogen, and the other big player in PCOS, which is really massive, is inflammation. And so with inflammation, the way that inflammation happens is through a long series of events. I'm just trying to find a good pen. One of the ways it happens is through the gut. And if you've heard the term leaky gut before, it's not a technical term, but what happens is when we have this intestinal permeability, we have these cells in our small intestine. They're like little single row of cells, like a row of bricks, and they're designed to let some things through, the things that should go through, like food, broken down food, particles, vitamins and minerals, things like that. But there's a lot of things that aren't meant to go through there, and it's meant to be a protective mechanism. What happens is the lining of this gut becomes degraded and not working as well. And it goes into things that shouldn't normally go in there, undigested food particles, consuming foods that will cause this more to happen, such as gluten. And then as a result, things go into our bloodstream, our immune system sees it, goes, holy shit, what the hell is that? And then you get this low-grade systemic inflammation. What are the big things, the big drivers of inflammation? Stress, blood sugar, and the gut. And so when we're talking about any condition, particularly with PCOS, it's like, okay, we've got to work on the insulin resistance, we've got to work on androgen excess and the estrogen excess, and we've got to work on the inflammation. How do we do that? We start working on the gut. We start working on the liver. So the way we move, the way we eat, we address deficiencies, any deficiencies, because the integrity of what's happening here. And when we're talking about stress, we're talking about our nervous system. And when we're in a constant state of alarm and we don't feel safe in our bodies, we make excess stress hormones, and it impacts our ability to make other hormones. Now, the counterbalance to this is also progesterone. Progesterone, and a lot of people, sorry, I've got really messy writing, are very low in progesterone when they have hormonal imbalances. This impacts symptoms like PCOS, but also premenstrual period pain. This counterbalances estrogen and does wonders. And so when we're not making enough progesterone, it is also stress related a lot of the time, because cortisol will be prioritized to be made as a hormone over all our other hormones. We also need adequate levels of cholesterol to make our hormones, which is why sometimes if you have gone and got your blood work done and your cholesterol is being high, it's like, okay, what are the stresses? Here's my question that I ask people. What are the stresses that are happening in your world to allow, what's your stress levels like? If a GP says to you, my cholesterol is high, first of all, their ranges are a little bit different to optimal ranges. And they just look at it very like, it's just cholesterol. But what does cholesterol do? Cholesterol is needed to make hormones. If we are stressed, it is needed to make cortisol. If we're making excess amount of cortisol, of course, our cholesterol is going to be high. It will then steal from making and prioritize cortisol over making other hormones like progesterone, right? And so we've got to go, okay, what have we got to do to address that? So these are the things that we've got to work on. And you can't just do one aspect, you've got to look at all aspects. And in this mix is also things like nutritional deficiencies. And this comes back to the way the gut and the liver are working. The way I explain the liver to people is, imagine there's 3 lanes of traffic. And you know what happens when you're on the freeway and there's 3 lanes of traffic and then it goes into one? There's a traffic jam. And so then there's things that are slowed down. And what happens is the liver can't cope because there's 3 phases to detoxification. And it gets through phase 1, but then phase 2 is here. And it goes, shit, we've got a backlog. We're going to have to circulate that back around the body. We'll deal with that later. And this plays part of the estrogen excess. So I know I'm talking about a lot of different things here, but I just want to give you an idea of like, okay, when I'm looking at someone with PCOS, what are the big players? It's androgen excess, insulin resistance, and inflammation, and all those things need to be addressed through the food and the nutritional aspect as the baseline, and also through nervous system regulation. You can go and have all the herbs in the world that you want for stress, but unless you learn also to regulate your nervous system, what is your own value, your own self-worth? A lot of women don't know how to set boundaries, ask for help. That creates stress. You know, this ability to constantly give and not receive, feeling I'm not worthy of receiving, past traumas and resentments, things like that, doing work around that, because it all plays into us being in this constant state of alarm and just trying to survive rather than actually realizing that we are safe in our own bodies. And when we actually start to feel safe in our own bodies, we can actually relax into safety, and then our hormones will start to regulate themselves. And I can give you an example of this week. For me, I went into a state of alarm because I've been house hunting, and there's just stress that came up around that, a lot of old belief systems, a lot of old money stories, and I went into this survival mode. And I had to step back and give myself a moment where I actually first of all, didn't make myself wrong for being in that space, and then regulate myself and give myself what I needed. So I actually, and it's constant work, doing it all the time, but I've got the tools to manage that. And so I'm really passionate also on helping people manage those tools. And as I worked through that, I just realized and in that moment felt the alarm that was in my body, and then connected back to the part of myself that needed the reassurance, which was like this 12-year-old version of me who was feeling this state of alarm. And it's often one foot in front of the other. And the problem is that we didn't get taught this stuff at school. We didn't get taught this stuff from our parents because our parents didn't know. But this is the impact that this sort of stuff can have. Then combined with them not also knowing how to look after ourselves, how to look after our gut. And so when we're looking at that, we're looking at the information, we've got to go, where's the information coming from? Where's the fire? And the fire, in my experience, is usually always from the environment, the diet, deficiencies. That's the baseline. It's like the foundation, and the way that our nervous system is functioning. And how we navigate both is super important. And often what I also notice is, and I've experienced this myself, when I'm in a constant state of alarm, prioritizing ourselves and not looking after ourselves doesn't happen. Like eating the right food, when you're in that constant state of alarm, you make quick responses or quick decisions just based on getting quick energy, because you need that energy to keep fueling it, because from a primal croc brain, we're in that point of fight or flight. We need to survive, we need to run away, or we need to hide and retract and just stay still until the damage is gone, the danger is gone. So it's a big topic, but if this resonated, please reach out, please send me a DM, please comment below, please ask any questions that you may have about this topic. I just realized I hadn't done something specific on PCOS, but hopefully that gives you some understanding. It's like, okay, so if you can't get to the bottom of this and you've been struggling with this a long time, this is what's going on, and these are the things that need to be addressed. Okay, guys, I hope you have a beautiful day, and I will speak to you soon.